Hello and welcome back to the Hindustan Times podcast. I'm your host Shashank Mattoo, reporting from Washington, D.C. The India-US relationship, it can be fairly said now, is in a state of crisis. We've had tariffs damaging the Indian economy, the deaths of Indian sailors in the U.S. Iran war, Trump's growing closeness to Pakistan, and the rising anti-Indian rhetoric that we've all seen coming out of the United States. All of this has led to a massive upsurge in anger in India against the United States. But despite that, you have a high profile meeting taking place between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump on the sidelines of the G7. And it seems that there are people on both sides, in India and the United States, who are determined to preserve this partnership, who understand that this relationship is important. But that leaves us the question about where exactly we are in the India US relationship and where both sides stand. Joining me now to unpack this relationship and where we are right now is Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. National Security Advisor to President Trump in his first term, and one of the men who built the U.S. India relationship. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for joining us here on HT. You played an extremely key role over the years in building the U.S. India relationship. Is it fair to say now, in your assessment, that we are in a state of crisis?
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily describe it as crisis, but it's certainly very fraught. There's no doubt about it. And I hope we can find ways through it. I'm sure we can cover all the different issues, but it is a fact that I think Trump and Modi have a good personal relationship. And certainly where Trump's concerned, personal relationships between the leaders are important. I think the ties between the two countries below the level of leader are also good and growing. And in fact, it's the ups and downs in the relationships between the leaders that sometimes make it look like the relationship is in more trouble than it is. Because I think at the more basic level of commerce and trade and interaction on a whole variety of ways and means, these things are improving, albeit with some bumps in the road.
Now, could I ask you something about the first Trump administration? Of course, you were national security advisor then, and that was a point of time where the India-US relationship improved substantially. In fact, when President Trump came back to office, people thought that this would be a very friendly administration to India, precisely because of the record that was built up in the first administration. Now there seems to be the sense that India is just much less of a priority for the president. We have not seen anything major come of the major technology partnerships between India and the United States. We've seen, of course, the deaths of Indian sailors. There was a response to that from the US government that was seen as extremely insensitive to the sentiments of the families, but also the Indian public. Of course, this conversation about Trump's closeness to Pakistan across the board, it seems that while Washington may want a good relationship with India, it isn't necessarily committed to a good relationship with India or making the hard choices that it takes to build that relationship. Could I ask you about, do you think something has changed? Has India been deprioritized for Washington?
Well, I think it is a variety of factors in play, as you say. Let's take trade to begin with. Uh, in the first term, I and many other people were trying to get more progress made with the Asian Security Quad. Initially, a project of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, but obviously involving Japan, India, Australia, and the U.S. We didn't make as much progress as I wanted to because Trump was so focused on talking about trade, and he had trade disputes with Australia, he had trade disputes with Japan, he had trade disputes with India, and we never had really time, I think, to engage on more strategic issues. That's gotten worse in the second term, beginning in April of 2025 with the so-called Liberation Day tariffs. I mean, my view on that is fairly straightforward. I'm opposed to all these tariffs. I don't think they make any sense for the United States, let alone for most of the countries they're being imposed upon. I think there are problems in international trade in the world. I would say China is the principal problem with international trade in the world for a whole variety of reasons. But what Trump did was declare war on everybody, almost every trading partner the United States had, which to me made no sense whatsoever. And then specifically in the case of India, when we came to questions like the reaction to purchases of sanctioned Russian oil, Trump's response was to really disproportionately penalize India. Didn't increase the tariffs on China at all, or on Pakistan, and I think that's a very significant mistake. So I can certainly understand how those trade tariff related factors have damaged the relationship. I think, as I say, there's actually a pretty simple way to correct this, which is just abolish all of the Trump tariffs. That obviously won't happen in his term, But I think the odds of a successor president, Republican or Democrat, are much more likely, maybe not as quickly as we would prefer, but much more likely to see the end of those tariffs. So that's one major area. There are obviously others as well.
Right. If I could ask you, Ambassador, about Pakistan, this is a country that you've dealt with a great deal. And I think when you talk to people in Delhi, when you talk to people on the street, the sense sometimes is that this is becoming one of those major irritants, has been for a long time, but is really becoming, again, one of the major irritants in the US India relationship. And when I came to Washington and I was talking to people, the sense was that, look, there are enough people in Washington who recognize the past, Pakistan's role in Afghanistan. Many people convinced here in Washington that Pakistan was responsible in part for helping lose America the Afghanistan war. But now it seems that President Trump seems to have forgotten that history or is putting it to the wayside. Could I ask you a little bit about that? Is America forgetting history a little bit when it comes to its relationship with Pakistan?
Well, Trump doesn't know any history, so you don't have to worry about him forgetting it. He never learned it in the first place. I thought in the George W. Bush administration we made a very a significant point of progress when as the phrase was used at the time, we had delinked India and Pakistan. That is to say, in U.S. relations, we treated each on their own merits, and behavior toward one was not dependent on behavior toward the other. I think that's the right way to do it. I think it's consistent with the strong, long-standing Indian position that relations with Pakistan are a bilateral matter between Pakistan and India, and others can stay out of it. And I understand that, and I think that's a correct approach for the U.S. to take. I think what's happened here has surprised a lot of people in Washington, uh, uh, and it goes back to the point I made a moment ago of this notion Trump has that you can sum up relationships between states by the relations between heads of state. So General Munir, getting very good advice from somebody, told Trump early on he would nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is one of Trump's major motivating factors in the second term. And Munir has played on that and very successfully to advance Pakistani interest. Trump has also, I think, made diplomatic missteps when referring to the resolution of conflict between India and Pakistan over terrorist attacks from Pakistan into India. He basically took credit for resolving it. And I can tell you from an analogous incident back in 2019, we were in Hanoi at the time for Trump to meet with Kim Jong Un, and there was terrorist attacks emanating from Pakistan into India. We were concerned about it. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and I stayed up much of the night in Hanoi talking to folks in India and Pakistan and back in Washington. And the issue was resolved between New Delhi and Islamabad. That's what happened. It wasn't because of anything we did. We were there to be helpful to the extent we could, and we certainly didn't run out the next morning and take credit for it. I think this is an example of Trump just not understanding the background of things and not really caring. Unfortunately, it's not a reflection, I think, of any broader sentiment in the United States about Pakistan. I have to say I'm concerned at the moment as we look at the situation in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz about mediation being carried out by countries that also have a stake in it, and the role and the background of all this of China. So it's I think this is largely this question of a tilt toward Pakistan, as some call it. I think it's largely a question of the aberration of Trump himself.
Right. And the question, of course, that a lot of people are asking is, okay, where does the American relationship with Pakistan go under President Trump from here on out? Is it, for example, possible that Washington will consider weapons sales to Pakistan again, as was his policy for decades in the past? Because that is a significant area of concern. And do you also see, Ambassador, how the American closeness to Pakistan in the Trump administration makes India trust America less?
Well, I think the issue of how to deal with Pakistan, in my view, is heavily colored by the Chinese efforts to use Pakistan as a surrogate, and we see this in a lot of ways. The construction of an oil terminal in Pakistan, so that oil from the Middle East can come out of the Strait of Hormuz or come out of wherever it's coming from, and not have to go through the Indian Ocean and the Strait of Malacca, but can go to this port in Pakistan be offloaded there and then sent by pipeline north through Pakistan and then east across Chinese territory. Uh, and I think the weapons relationship between China and Pakistan is very troubling too, and something that is disturbing to the U.S. from a strategic point of view, and obviously disturbing to India as well. So I think it's important to be careful here. And I think you've got a situation as well in Pakistan. Obviously, the military has had a dominant role in Pakistan since partition. I don't think anybody disputes that. It's now not even pretending not to be in control. And it's been the consistent U.S. position that a democratically elected Pakistani government, understanding the military is often referred to as the steel skeleton in Pakistan, but a democratically elected government is what we prefer. Obviously, we're not there at this point.
Could I ask you a little bit about Iran now, just to shift gears a little bit, because we've just had the ceasefire in the conflict. It's been shaky, but so far, at least, we haven't seen an active resumption of hostilities. Could I ask you a little bit about the impact that the Iran war has also had on the US-India relationship? Because what the war did, of course, was it did send energy prices rising everywhere around the world, led to shortages in India, which of course directly affected Indian citizens, the deaths of the three Indian sailors in the US Navy strikes. And of course, there was a sense that when it came to handling the matter sensitively, I think the State Department put out, when it came to a conversation between Secretary Rubio and Dr. Jaishankar on this very question, it was a very harsh statement, sort of saying that, look, yes, these people have died, but you can't violate a US blockade on Iran. So again, one of those, in a time of a fraught relationship, as you said, the US-Iran war does not seem to have helped the relationship. Could I ask you to maybe comment on what you see the war as playing a role in the India-US relationship?
Well, there's a lot to criticize in Trump's conduct of the war. Number one, I to this day don't know what his objectives were. I make no bones about it. I've said for decades there will never be peace and stability in the Middle East while that regime remains in power in Tehran. Was Trump trying to change the regime? It sounded like it at the beginning, but he denied it later. And I think that's part of the problem and part of the reason we're in a very difficult, dangerous stage now is that he didn't think all this through. Another thing that Trump didn't do before launching the military activity was consult with our friends and allies. Didn't consult with NATO. We didn't consult with the Gulf Arab states. We didn't consult with countries in the Indo-Pacific that rely heavily on exports of oil from the Gulf to say, not to reveal the detailed plans of what we're about to do, but to say this is very serious and we're looking at taking steps that could affect you. Let's talk about how we're going to deal with that. He didn't do any of that. He didn't do a lot of other things either. He didn't consult with the opposition inside Iran, probably the biggest mistake of all, to find out what help they needed, what we could give them, how they could participate if this really were an effort to change the regime. This has now come to a memorandum of understanding that Trump signed, not for any geostrategic reasons, but because he wanted oil to flow out of the Gulf into global markets to bring the price at the pump of gasoline in the United States down. That is the motivating factor. And yet that is not occurring. Iranian oil is coming through because the blockade has been lifted, but oil from the Gulf Arab side is now still restricted a little bit, but not nearly pre-war production. So the global spot market prices have come way down because people are optimistic. I wouldn't be so optimistic, actually. I think there's more to worry about here, but I'm still not sure we've done enough to work with countries affected by it. And you don't have to sign up to the entire coalition and all of its activities, but not to take into account the impacts that we are seeing is just a violation of diplomacy 101. Now, on the deaths of the three Indian sailors, look, it's a tragedy. There's no doubt about it. It clearly was not handled well. I would just say this: the fact of the blockade was well known, and when you're in a situation like that, the captain's responsibility of a commercial vessel is to think of his good ship and crew. And the captain was given an order to stop heading toward Iran, to go to the parking place out in the Gulf of Oman where a lot of ships were interned. And he didn't do it. he was given several warnings and told what we would do, which is fire into the engine room of the ship and disable it, and then we would take it over to the parking lot, and that is what happened. Obviously we understand the humanitarian concern in India. I would put more responsibility on the captain for not considering his responsibilities. Uh, uh, Commercial vessels can't fight warships. It's a lose proposition, and he should have known that.
The question I wanted to ask you more broadly about the conflict is that the criticism in India is that over the last 15, 20 years, we have given up a relationship with Iran in favor of closer ties with the United States. We also saw before this conflict, there was a sense, and there's been this commentary in India, that India very clearly aligned itself with the United States and Israel during this conflict with Iran. And the sense now is that we've had the deaths of these sailors, we've got energy prices skyrocketing, and of course, at the same time, there's the sense that Washington and Israel were not fundamentally able to achieve their aims in the first place. So, what was the point of aligning with America in the first place? Did this not fundamentally hurt our interests? And this, in the minds of many critics of the US India relationship, is what happens when you get too close to Washington. Your view on this?
Well, I think the question of Iran is one that does have global implications, and we can start with their support for international terrorism. They have for 3 or 4 decades now been the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, and they're not the only source of revenue and weapons and training and intelligence for terrorist groups, but certainly a lot comes from Iran, and their efforts around the world really, I think, are a major threat to stability, not just in the Middle East, but internationally. And their pursuit of nuclear weapons is in advancing this. Really, it's an ideological agenda in the Middle East and more broadly is very troubling too. If Trump had been able to define his goals more carefully, if what this military action was intended to be was, as the Israelis put it, a mowing the lawn of Iranian capabilities, then I think people would have seen the understanding of what we were up to and what the limits of it were. But he didn't do that, and this is, I think, as I said before, this reflects confusion in his own mind. This is a real problem for the United States and for others who say, well, we can't even understand what the United States is doing. There are many cases where we understand what they're doing. We may not agree with it, but at least we understand it. Here, because of the nature of Donald Trump, I think internationally it's not well understood. It's not well understood in the United States either, and that's a big problem for Trump politically, especially among Republicans. So I don't think you should read Trump's problems as indicating a broader American lack of interest in the relationship with India or in dealing effectively with this regime in Iran. And it's a matter that I don't think is going to be fixable as long as Trump is president. I don't want to minimize the downside of his erratic and unpredictable behavior, but it's not something that has support in the country as a whole. And if he had thought about the potential that the Iranians would try and close the Strait of Hormuz, then he might have gone about it in a different way. He says he was surprised that they closed the Strait of Hormuz. That would make him the only person in the world surprised that they tried to do that. This has been a potential problem, ever since the Ayatollahs took over in 1979.
Could I ask you just to switch gears on China, because I think this is another significant area of doubt or perhaps concern with the US India relationship. And that is that for the longest time, the relationship between the United States and America, it was felt the strategic bedrock of that was our shared concern about the strategic rise of China. Now it seems like the Trump administration has a much softer, much less competitive view of its relationship with China. And therefore, it seems like India and forums like the Quad, which were built very painstakingly over the course of the last decade, they seem to have lost some value for Washington. Could you give us your sense of where the Trump administration is on China?
Well, it's hard to say because it depends on what Trump's thinking is on any given day. He's very concerned about Chinese trading practices and the subsidies and unfair competition that they engage in. But he's also captivated by Xi Jinping. This again is another example of the idea that if he's got a good personal relationship with Xi Jinping, everything's fine in China-U.S. relation, which it's not manifestly. And I think that Trump is very impressed by pageantry. I was with him in the UK in 2018 when Prime Minister Theresa May was giving him a lunch at the Checkers, and he talked about his 2017 visit to China. And Trump said, "You know, they gave me the biggest welcome they have ever given any foreign leader in all of Chinese history." And everybody around the table just remained silent because what do you say to that? That's what affects Trump. And I think among members of Congress, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, the concern about China is one of the rare things that has strong bipartisan support. And the way Trump reacts to China really does not make Republicans or Democrats very happy. So again, I think the underlying interest here of India and the United States facing the problems that China causes remain basically the same. And I'd like to see ways to make progress even as Trump kind of flits around above the level of hard policy discussion.
Right. Yeah, can I ask you just two final questions? One was on something that we saw that made a lot of news, which is the United States Indo-Pacific Command dropping the Indo from its prefix and, of course, going back to its original name, which was U.S. Pacific Command. Now, of course, this sounds very technical jargony for a general audience. Perhaps you could explain the significance of that decision. But also, it seemed that when in 2018 the Trump administration was responsible for naming the command the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the idea was that, look, it signifies the value of India, the value of the Indian Ocean to us, to our broader strategy. And of course, as I was saying, this broader sense or concern that the relationship with India has been deprioritized in Washington. This sort of confirms a lot of those fears that, by dropping the Indo from the Indo-Pacific Command, it seems like a signal of where Washington's head is at. Could you break down the change because it happened during your time in office, but also what that means on the ground for U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific, to its relationship with India?
Right. Well, the Pentagon has the world divided into commands. There's the North American Command, there's the Southern Command, the European Command, and previously there was the Pacific Command or PACOM, which covered everything from the west coast of the United States, the west coast of the Americas, all the way across the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So, in the first Trump term, recognizing the geographic reality of the command's responsibility, but also to signify that it was bigger than the Pacific, we changed it to Indo-PACOM. And I thought it was a good idea at the time. I still think it's a good idea. I think it's just a childish mistake to change it back. And I predict it will change back again when we get another president, as it should. So it's a Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth apparently made the decision. I don't know what he thought he was doing, but I would just hope people would say it's not part of some grand design to downplay U.S.-India relations, because there isn't any grand design in the Trump administration. It's all ad hoc, seat of the pants decision making. And it's just we were right when we changed the name in 2018 to Indo-PACOM, and we just should have left it that way.
Right. May I just ask very quickly as a follow-up, because to a lot of people, what it seems like is, China has had its problems with the idea of the Indo-Pacific, just very concept of it, and of course, groupings like the Quad, and it seems that the sense that some people are getting is that America's decision to drop the Indo from Indo-Pacific Command was a sign that, look, they don't want to step on China's toes too much. And if you also see at the same time the fact that there has not been a Quad leaders summit for the last 1.5 years, both of those things coming together seems like America sort of saying, look, we want a much more stable relationship with China. We don't want a competitive relationship. So we're going to make these superficial changes that reassure China. Do you think that's what's going on, or is that overreading into it?
No, I think that gives the Trump administration too much credit. I just think it's a series of unrelated things. I mean, the concept we were advancing, again, this is not a U.S. concept. It was from Shinzo Abe. who talked about a free and open Indo-Pacific, and I think that remains the objective of everybody in the Quad and many others in the region. And China may not like that either, but that is the concept that I think all of our interests are based on, and that's not going to change just because of Donald Trump.
A last question then, Ambassador, which is that where do we go from here? Because the word trust, I think, is used a lot in the India-US relationship and how that seems to have been lost. So the question, of course, is can America rebuild that lost trust? And if it can, how does that happen?
Well, I think we can. I mean, I think it's obviously hard to separate the president from the country and the people, but Trump is an aberration, and I think his behavior demonstrates it almost across the board on any given day. Uh, I agree. I think decades of effort by the U.S. in the relationship with India have suffered as a result, and so I think it's on the part of those of us in the U.S. who think this relationship is important to try and minimize whatever additional damage he may do, and then when he's out of office, try and rebuild it. So what I recommend to friends around the world is grit your teeth and remember that there's a future after Donald Trump's administration is over, and keep in mind the big picture threats and challenges that we face that also are permanent fixtures of the environment.
Ambassador John Bolton, we've talked about the US India relationship, the US Pakistan relationship, the Iran war, China, the Indo Pacific, and the Quad. Thank you so much for this extremely wide ranging conversation, for sharing your thoughts as well as your experience. And hopefully, our readers, our viewers, take something away from this. Thank you so much again, Ambassador Bolton, for joining us here on the Hindustan Times podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.